Now we move on to the panel discussion. And this panel discussion will be facilitated by Srija Neya, Associate Fellow, Center for Global Environmental Research, Earth Science and Climate Change Division of Delhi. She is an interdisciplinary researcher with a Master of Science in Environmental Studies and a Master of Art in Climate and Society from Columbia University. She focuses on assessment of vulnerability and adaptation to climate risks and impacts and understanding policy linkages. She has had a lot of experiences on research projects inside, outside of India on climate change and other environmental issues. So, Srija, please.
Okay, sorry. Thank you, Professor Mori. And good afternoon, everybody. This is just a session before lunch. So unfortunately, one of our panelists, Dr. Suthawan, could not join us for this session. So I'm being a little adaptive here, and I've restructured it a little bit. I'll just briefly put down some issues and questions on the table, followed by a presentation by Mr. Sam from ARUP. And after that, I'll just invite our presenters from the morning, Darren and Dr. Lubel, again on the dais before we summarize and close this session. So just very briefly, some of the issues based on my own experience from India and working on policy, why are here now we're talking about now the shortcomings of current current approaches of governance. Firstly, if you talk of the different scales that exist as you move from the national to the to the local level and subnational levels, there are these different scales, and how do you really assess the feedbacks that happen or the cross-sectoral linkages that happen on these different scales? And even if you're recording feedbacks, you're recording opinions, and Dr. Louis Lebel also discussed a little bit about it, what are the methodologies of recording these different opinions? Are you just going to stakeholders, taking their opinion and coming back and doing what you would have done anyway? So what is the right ratio of using expert judgment versus the outlook or the perceptions of stakeholders? Now, issues like climate change, now these are not very straightforward problems. These are unstructured problems, also called wicked problems. They don't have a very easy root cause or an easy solution. So when there are these multiple perceptions, multiple stakes that exist, how are you going to record these different opinions that exist, and how are you going to feed back into the system? Another issue is in terms of time frames. When you go to policymakers, the scientists are able to provide information on specific time frames, but what kind of information is required for decision making? Some policymakers want information as far as 2100, while if you go down to the community for their decision making, all they want to know is what's going to happen next year or probably for the next season. So how are these issues of time frames being addressed? Also, in terms of the different models that exist, different quantitative tools that exist, what are the assumptions that these are based on, and are these assumptions being communicated to people who are actually going to take decisions? Do they know that their decisions are being taken based on some model outputs which were under a specific some specific boundary conditions? And sometimes, quantitative models or quantitative techniques are just not able to capture enough information. So you need to back it up, or you need to validate it with qualitative information as well. So how does that, and that brings me to another issue of traditional knowledge versus new knowledge which is coming up. So how are there methodologies, are there ways, or are there shortcomings in our approaches right now that we cannot really do a fine balance between the two? And another is in terms of characterization of the changing nature of risk. So how do you assess the risk in terms of what is a slow onset event or versus a very rapid or an extreme event? So these are just some of the questions which I'm putting on the table, and so I'm really happy that we have Sam here who will be able to present from a urban perspective, because in urban areas it's just so much more complicated. The nature of risks is so much more interconnected, and you get to see it a lot of interactions in an urban environment. So he'll be able to present from the Asian Cities Climate Change Resilience Network work that ARUP is doing. So just 2 lines to introduce Sam. He is a senior consultant with ARUP's international development team, ARUP being an infrastructure and planning company, and he has a lot of experience in urban and regional planning in different parts of Asia, Europe and Australia. So over to you, Sam.
Thank you, Srija, and thank you for highlighting the difficulties, I guess, that urban environments face. Certainly that's been the experience of the Asian Cities Climate Change Resilience Network, and certainly we are continually learning, and while I'm hoping to present some lessons today, certainly don't have any solutions as yet. I've also not been on a panel of one before, so it's quite a new experience. I think one of the benefits might be that we actually might get back on schedule. So I'll press on. Being from a infrastructure and planning company, it's always important to remind ourselves, I think, of a couple of principles which we sort of, not being an engineer, but we also always sort of reinforce with our engineering brethren, is that. And this reflects on some of the issues that have been raised this morning. We always remind ourselves to some degree that technology is easy and people are difficult. Now, those of you that deal with technology will say, well, hang on, this is probably not quite the case, but certainly dealing with engineering solutions, it's certainly always important to remember the people. The other side of that, and I think this again reflects what Darren was saying earlier, that we always remember to try and live with nature rather than keeping nature out. And this is definitely a key principle to remember when we're talking about planning for uncertainty or planning infrastructure for uncertainty. So back to the program. So the Asian Cities Climate Change Resilience Network was conceived by the Rockefeller Foundation in 2007, founded on three principles. One was the precipitous urbanisation that's happening around the world, but particularly in Asia. And this sort of first factoid, I guess, that within a decade, over 500 cities at least will have more than 1 million people. And that's the focus of the program, was not on mega cities, which I know a lot of people are working on and are very challenging environments. But we're focused on the small and medium-sized cities that are making plans for the future that are likely to double or triple in growth in the next short while, and their infrastructure and planning decisions. The issue of climate change, obviously, we'll get into sort of some more details, but the way in which rainfall and temperature are challenging urban environments, obviously sea level rise as well, changing seasonality is making urban environments, decision making in urban environments even more challenging than it already is. And the issue of poverty, the issue of development agendas in these cities being made more difficult. We've already got development challenges that we're certainly not solving, as it were. We're making progress on the Millennium Development Goals, but the issues are there, and they need to be sort of focused on. So the sort of interaction of these three issues. So ACERN, or the Asian Cities Climate Change Resilience Network, selected